In the late 1990s, Marvel was nearly bankrupt, so desperate that it offered to sell the movie rights to almost its entire superhero universe for just $25 million. Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, the Avengers, all of them. And the studio they approached said no. Not because the price was too high, but because, in their words, nobody cares about the other characters. Today, those same characters power a film empire worth tens of billions of dollars. So how did Marvel almost sell its future? And how did one rejected deal accidentally reshape Hollywood? This is the story of Marvel's collapse, Sony's gamble on Spider-Man, and the decision that changed the superhero industry forever. Marvel began not as a carefully planned universe, but as a fast-moving business chasing trends. In 1939, a publisher named Martin Goodman launched a company called Timely Comics. Goodman wasn't a dreamer, he was a hustler. He published whatever sold: pulp magazines, westerns, romance, crime stories. And when superhero comics started gaining popularity, Goodman jumped in immediately. Timely's early hits included characters like the Human Torch and Submariner, but these weren't carefully nurtured icons. They were products. If something sold, it stayed. If it didn't, it disappeared. The company grew fast, but it was never stable. Writers and artists came and went. Deadlines were brutal. Credit was rarely given. Still, Timely survived because it moved faster than everyone else. And that instinct, speed over stability, would define Marvel for decades. But in the late 1950s, that strategy stopped working. By the end of the 1950s, superhero comics were dying. Publishers were shutting down. Readers were losing interest. The genre felt stale. Timely, now operating under different names, was struggling to stay relevant. That's when Goodman made one last gamble. He told his editor, Stan Lee, to try something different. Stan Lee had grown tired of perfect heroes and recycled plots, so instead of gods, he wrote people. Heroes who argued. Heroes who doubted themselves. Heroes who had money problems, family problems, and bad days. Working alongside artists like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, Lee helped create Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, X-Men, Hulk, Iron Man. These characters didn't live in isolated stories. They shared a world. They crossed paths. They remembered what happened last time. Marvel didn't invent superheroes. They invented continuity. Readers felt like they were following a living universe, not flipping through disconnected stories. By the mid-1960s, Marvel had become a cultural force, but beneath the creativity, the business was fragile. Marvel was rich in ideas, and poor in everything else. Despite creating some of the most valuable characters in history, Marvel struggled financially for decades. Why? Because it didn't control distribution, because it paid creators poorly, because ownership stayed with the company, not the people who made the characters famous. Marvel made hits, but it didn't build foundations. As years passed, Marvel changed hands multiple times. Different owners, different strategies, different debts. Every new leadership team tried to fix Marvel. Most just added complexity. Then came the early 1990s, and for a brief moment, Marvel looked unstoppable. In the early 1990s, comics were booming. Collectors were hoarding issues. Speculators believed comics were investments. Sales numbers exploded. Marvel leaned in hard. They printed more, raised prices, flooded the market, and then the bubble burst. Collectors vanished. Comic shops closed. Unsold inventory piled up. By 1996, Marvel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This wasn't a temporary dip. This was existential. Marvel didn't need vision. It needed cash. Immediately. So they did something that would define their future. They began selling their most valuable assets, not the comics, the film rights. One by one, Marvel carved itself apart. X-Men and Fantastic Four went to Fox. Hulk went to Universal. Iron Man went to New Line Cinema. Each deal brought fast money and long-term regret. At the time, these characters weren't seen as guaranteed hits. Superhero movies had a bad reputation. Studios were cautious. Budgets were limited. Marvel had no leverage. So when Sony came knocking, Marvel didn't see a threat. They saw a lifeline. But Sony wasn't looking to rescue Marvel. Sony was looking to buy one thing. By the late 1990s, Sony already understood entertainment better than most companies on Earth. They owned music, they owned movies, they owned gaming. What they needed was icons, characters that could travel across mediums and cultures. And Spider-Man was perfect. Everyone knew him. Kids loved him. Adults recognized him. He was urban, emotional, and visually cinematic. Spider-Man wasn't just a superhero. He was a brand. So in 1998, a Sony executive named Yair Landau approached Marvel to negotiate. What happened next is one of the most shocking counteroffers in Hollywood history. Marvel's leadership, desperate to stabilize the company, made a proposal that sounds unbelievable today. They offered Sony the film rights to almost the entire Marvel universe for $25 million, not per character, total. Iron Man, Thor, Black Panther, Captain America, the Avengers, all of it. But Sony didn't see what Marvel saw. To Sony executives, these characters were untested, unknown, risky. Spider-Man was the only name that mattered. According to multiple accounts, Sony's response was blunt. Nobody cares about the other characters. Go back and do a deal for only Spider-Man. That sentence may be the most expensive misjudgment in modern entertainment history. But at the time, it sounded reasonable. In 1999, Sony finalized the deal. They paid roughly $7 million for Spider-Man and his surrounding universe. That included villains like Venom, Green Goblin, and Dr. Octopus. From Sony's perspective, it was brilliant. They got a globally recognized hero at a bargain price. Marvel, meanwhile, felt relief. They had cash. They avoided liquidation. They lived to fight another day. But buried inside the contract was a clause that neither side fully understood the consequences of. A clause that would turn Spider-Man into a permanent hostage. Sony's deal came with one condition. Sony would retain the Spider-Man rights indefinitely, as long as they kept making Spider-Man movies. If Sony ever waited too long, the rights would automatically revert to Marvel. Spider-Man wasn't just a character anymore. He was a clock. Sony couldn't pause. Sony couldn't wait. Sony couldn't take creative breaks. They had to keep making films, good or bad, just to keep ownership alive. That's why when the original Spider-Man trilogy ended, Sony rebooted the franchise almost immediately. It wasn't creative urgency. It was legal necessity. And while Sony was busy racing the clock, Marvel was quietly rebuilding itself. After bankruptcy, Marvel made a radical decision. They stopped selling. And they started betting on themselves. Instead of licensing characters away, Marvel began producing their own films. They started with Iron Man, a character Sony once dismissed as worthless. The movie worked. Then Thor worked. Then Captain America worked. Then the Avengers changed everything. Marvel had rebuilt itself without Spider-Man. In 2009, Disney bought Marvel for $4 billion. But Spider-Man was missing. Disney couldn't just take him back. The Sony contract was airtight. So instead of fighting, they negotiated. Today, Spider-Man exists in a rare arrangement. Sony owns the film rights and collects box office revenue from solo Spider-Man movies. Marvel gets to use Spider-Man in shared films. And Marvel keeps 100% of the merchandise revenue. Toys, clothing, licensing, no one fully wins. But no one fully loses either, because they stopped treating each other as enemies. The Sony Marvel story isn't really about superheroes, it's about perception. Sony saw Spider-Man as the prize, and they were right. Marvel saw survival, and they were right too. But neither company could have predicted how powerful the other would become. And this isn't unique. Some of the most dominant forces in business history didn't win alone. They partnered. Because sometimes, two imperfect halves create something unstoppable. Sony and Marvel didn't plan to become allies. They were forced into it by contracts, pressure, and time. And yet, their uneasy alliance produced some of the most successful films ever made. Which raises a final question worth sitting with. How many companies could be far more powerful if they stopped trying to win alone? Because in business, just like in storytelling, sometimes the most valuable outcome isn't ownership, it's alignment.